Okay, shall we all mute our mics? Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to today's talk. So Aparajita, shall we begin?
Yeah, sure. Welcome everyone to NCF's 25th anniversary Friday talk. Today I think is the fourth one. Kumar Sambhav is a journalist and most of you would be aware of his work and writings. He'll be talking about the role of businesses and the state in natural resources transactions and how their, how their motivations shape environmental conflicts in the country. I've been a big admirer of his work and reporting on environmental issues and governance matters related to land conflicts and land rights. He's reported for India's prime news outlets before, including Business Standard, The Scroll, .in, Hindustan Times, Down to Earth, and Times of India on governance, business, and social justice. He's the founding partner of Land Conflict Watch, which we'll probably be talking about today, I think. And he's also a member of the Reporters Collective, which is a collective of journalists, like-minded journalists who, I think they set it up last year, which reports on stories that put the spotlight on those in power, difficult stories, and they shed light on how India's political economy and governance functions. And these stories are also, they work closely with other news organizations to produce work in different medium and in multiple languages. For his reporting, Kumar Sambhav has received many awards, including the Press Council of India National Award for Excellence in Journalism, the Shriram Award for Excellence in Financial Journalism, and several more. I welcome Kumar Sambhav to give us his talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Aparajita, and thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you, NCF, for giving me the opportunity to speak before you all. And I'm really glad to be here. With the online medium, I always fear that such talks may become monotonous and one-sided discussions. So I try my best to make it a two-way conversation. And I urge you to also engage wherever you can. Ganesh, can you start sharing the presentation?
Sure, doing that now.
Thank you. So I'll begin with a couple of video clips, and Ganesh, can you go to the next slide? Play the video clips. So the first one is from Goda in Jharkhand, where these women farmers are lying in the feet of company officials, where a power plant is being built by one of the subsidiaries of Adani. And they're protesting against takeover of their fertile land. And the second one is actually from Hazaribagh again in Jharkhand, where police opened fire on unarmed farmers who were protesting again against the takeover of their land for coal mining. Can we move to the next? So I wanted to show these videos basically just to get a sense of how land conflicts or natural resource conflicts look on the ground, what really it feels like to be on the ground when conflicts happen. While these are some of the incidents, these conflicts are long-term processes. To give a quick background in what we would be talking about today's subject, India has just 2.4% of the world's land area, but it supports a much larger share, 17% of the world population. And about 400 million people directly depend on land and its resources for livelihood. It's also home to about 8% of the world's biodiversity. Now, our country also has an ambitious agenda of economic growth, and it relies heavily on natural resources to fuel this growth. This naturally sets up contests between industry, the state, political class, and citizens over the use and ownership of land and natural resources. We have heard of several instances of conflicts in which land is forcefully acquired, documents are forged, dissenters are booked under false charges, compensation is paid partially, houses are torched, and even people get killed. But what exactly causes these conflicts, and what is the scale of their impact? And more importantly, who are the actors involved and how do their motivation shape these conflicts? So in this talk, basically, I shall draw from the work that my colleagues at Land Conflict Watch has done in the past 5 years, and also the reportage that I and my colleagues at the Reporters Collective have produced as journalists to answer these questions. Now, let's first look at the scale of these conflicts. So about 5 years ago, we started methodological mapping of land conflicts in India, and we created an online database of ongoing land conflicts. With the help of over 40 researchers spread across the country, we have collected granular data on reasons and impact of land conflicts. So we have documented about 750 cases where people have come together in large numbers to contest the ownership, control, access, or use of land and its resources. The impact of these conflicts, both on people and businesses, is huge. Take, for example, together these conflicts affect 7.9 million people and rupees 25.3 trillion of committed, earmarked, and potential investments. Close to 3.7 million hectare land is involved in these conflicts, and this is 25 times of the area of the National Capital Region around Delhi. So now, before we actually get into the core of today's subject, I would like us to spend a few more minutes on some of the key findings from Land Conflict Watch's research, which basically forms the context of this discussion. Can you move to next? So we categorized the land conflicts on the basis of the activities, activities of the businesses and the state. And we found that the largest 42% of the conflicts are happening because of the infrastructure projects, followed by the nature and conservation, forestry and conservation activities, and then comes the industries. We also categorize We also categorize the conflicts based on the tenure types of land, and we found more than 70% conflicts involve the commons, and only 29% conflicts are limited to private properties or resources. Now, this is important because land conflicts as such have been mostly debated in terms of the private property disputes. But when we talk about the natural resources conflicts, the importance of conflicts around common really comes out with our data, because that's really the resources that are collectively owned by public and communities. And also that's something that the state is quite deeply involved with managing them, unlike the private conflicts. And more importantly, our data also showed that marginalized communities such as tribals and those living in resource-rich but violence-affected areas are disproportionately affected by these conflicts. Next. So I'll show you in this map, the districts with the green boundaries are the Schedule 5 districts, which are predominantly populated by tribal population in the country. And the red color denotes the districts which have the intensity of the red color denotes the number of conflicts or intensity of conflicts in these regions. And we can see that overall there is a broad overlap of the districts where predominantly tribal populations lives, as well as the conflicts which have the districts which have higher intensity of conflicts. Next. And similarly, we also map the districts which are affected by the Naxal violence. And we know that originally by the literature, there is immense literature which suggests that the origin of Naxal violence also coincides with land alienation and resource alienation. And here we see that even today, the current land conflicts or natural resource conflicts disproportionately impact, again, the same population which is also affected by this kind of violence. Next. Now, Ganesh, if you could please stop sharing the presentation. So now I want to take a step back here and also come to the more interesting bit about these natural resources conflicts, that is the actors. So in most conflicts, essentially, there are three kinds of actors. The public or the communities, businesses, and the state agencies. Conflicts arise when there is a transaction of natural resources, land, water, forest, biodiversity, traditional knowledge, etc. The transactions are basically of the rights to access, use, or control these resources. I wanted to ask you a question. Among these actors, the communities, businesses, and the state, whose role, in your opinion, is the most critical and defining in how the environmental conflicts take shape? So anyone, between these three actors, communities, businesses, and the state, whose role is the most critical in defining how environmental conflicts would take shape? All right. Is there anyone who wants to go, or I can?
There are some responses in the chat. Some people are saying it's the state. Niranjan says business, state, community, in that order. Yeah, state, business.
Interesting. I'm sure all of you would have your own reasoning to these answers. But before I get into that, let me share a few stories with you. And we'll come back to this question and the answers that everyone believes after these stories. So, Ganesh, can you share the screen? So here's the story of Hasdewaran Forest. We all know, we all must have heard about it. It has been in the news recently, because there are like large number of tribals conducted a protest, and there was a Padayatra to the state capital in Chhattisgarh, Raipur, a 10 days yatra. And interestingly, immediately that the yatra was in protest of coal mining in their land. And immediately after that yatra, the government actually cleared one of the mines in the region. Interestingly, several mines in this forest, Hasdewaran Forest, is sort of contracted to one of the biggest industrialists in the country, some of the subsidiaries of Adani Groups. Now, the story actually goes a few years back. In the early 2010s, the Environment Ministry under the UPA government took an unprecedented decision. It decided to identify the last remaining pristine forest in the country and keep them out of bounds for mining. Sorry. So basically, the UPA government 2010 decided to keep these pristine forests out of bounds from mining. And after a scientific exercise, the ministry identified about 250 such blocks. But the other hands of the government who deal with business side of the land resources, especially the coal ministry, obviously resisted. And after much back and forth over several years, with the PMO playing the arbitrator between these two arms, conservation and the business side within the government, it was decided that 73 blocks of forest must remain inviolate. This list was revised, actually trimmed from 250 to 73, again based on the scientific criteria by scientists, saying, okay, we can let go some of the forests which do not have this much value, but some which has this much dense forest or this kind of water resources, we must have to protect these 73 blocks from any kind of mining or disturbance. So the 73 blocks were decided. Now, one of the coal blocks falling in this list also happens to be the Parsa block in Hastewaran, which was contracted to Adani for mining. The government changed in between, and the coal ministry started lobbying again with the environment ministry to remove Hastev block, entire block, from the inviolate list. Next slide. So if you see here, this is the list of these last, finally, after all the deliberations and trimming, dilution, these last 73 blocks, which should have been inviolate. And if you see the highlighted one, Parsa, it says inviolate. And the next column, if you see, very dense forest, more than 1 square kilometer. So according to scientific criteria, this did have very dense forest. It was allotted for mining. So it's saying that this is the current status. And the last column says BM proposed, which basically is saying that boundary modification proposed. So when the discussions were happening of how many coal blocks should be inviolate, how many should not be, after a lot of boundary modifications, they had diluted this list. And now here they are saying that these 73, even the boundary modification is not possible. So this can't happen. The next slide. But as I said, after the government change and in 2015, this is the correspondence which was accessed through right to information applications. There was correspondence between the coal ministry and the environment ministry. They started lobbying with each other, and the coal ministry said, okay, these 6 blocks have to be removed from the inviolate list because there's mining going on and we can't do much. Next slide. So what the environment ministry did, it sent us a committee of bureaucrats to go and do the site visit on this particular coal block and come back and say, whether this coal blocks is actually pristine or not. And this site bureaucrats go to the ground and say, oh, we are not sure actually if this is very dense forest or not. And based on this report of this site committee, the ministry said, okay, so there is no surety that this forest has very dense forest or not. We can allow mining in this, despite the state government resisting or sort of not agreeing with this recommendation. So they told the state government, if you see the last line in this slide, that, okay, you can go back and check whether it's very dense forest or not, but for now, we are allowing the mining. So this happened in this particular case. Now, basically the earlier, all the earlier scientific determination of pristine forest or inviolate, as well as the protest and several complaints from tribals on the ground about violations of land rights were thrown out of window. Next. Now, this another story most of us know about, this famous story of environmental violations by the Adani Group subsidiary in Mundra port. Now, here are some interesting bits from the documents. Next slide. In 2013, the Congress-led United Progressive Alliance government decided to impose a penalty of rupees 200 crore on Adani Group for constructing the project in violation of environmental laws. That became a big news. But in 2015, after the government changed, the new government made a U-turn and cancelled that fine on Adani. It said that under the law, the government could not impose such a penalty. And when it faced criticism and allegations of crony capitalism, etc., the Environment Ministry came up with an explanation and said that, okay, violations have indeed happened, but those would be dealt with separately later after the studies to assess the damage are conducted. And it's even argued on record that, okay, scrapping the fine of 200 crore has actually opened the possibility of company later paying an account or an amount even higher. So this happened. They sort of then buried it. Later, 5 years later, we reviewed the government records under the RTI law, and this is what we found. The ministry officials internally gave clean chit to the project. They followed the same methodology. A committee visited the site. It said the company at the time of the site visit was found to be following all rules. This, the ministry later used to conclude the project did not violate any regulations or cause any damage to the environment. So, next slide, please. If you see, this is the internal sort of documentation within the Environment Ministry, which again was accessed through the right to information law. And this on the left first column, if you see, these basically show these were the conditions these were the violations that had occurred. Now there is a site visit by a committee. It says that, okay, the project proponent, if you read here, the yellow part in the second column, the project proponent inferred that no mangroves are destroyed during construction or operation of the project activity. So the condition is complied because they said there was no destruction. Again, second violation was that there shall be no filling of the creek and reclamation of the creeks here after the site visit. All the above creeks are reported to be existing in existence, allowing free flow of water, and there is no filling or reclamation of any creek area. So when the site visit happened, it all looked fine to them. And they said, okay, condition complied. So on the basis of this, even the previous violations which were proven and a fine was imposed, they said no violations are happening now. A clean chit was given. And now, let me just share another fascinating account, the third story. Next slide, please. I personally found this account very fascinating because it tells how natural resource can be intertwined in a state political economy so intrinsically. It is about the auction of tendu leaves, an immensely lucrative forest produce used to make bidis or the country cigarettes. Now, the next slide. If you look at this graph carefully, you'll see a fascinating trend. The sale price of the leaves of tendu leaves in Chhattisgarh peaks after every 4 years of assembly elections. And then in the election years, it falls dramatically. So any guess why this happens? Anyone? So here, the sale value of tendu leaves is in billion rupees. And if you see every 4 years, this is increasing. And the 5th year, the red ones are the election year, it falls dramatically. All right. So here is the catch. Tendu leaves is one such natural resource which under the law, the whole profit has to flow back to actually the public, people. So under the Forest Right Act, tendu leaves are supposed to be owned by tribals and indigenous people who collect these from forest. And the government is basically the trustee. So the government conducts auctions, right? And it cuts the operational cost and then flows all the profit back to the tribals. Now, when we reviewed the documents of the 2019 auctions, which was also the 2018 auctions, which was also the election year for the state, we saw clear indications of cartelizations in the auctions in that year. So naturally, the market prices of the leaves rise every year with inflation and growth in the market, etc. And that actually reflects in this 4-year cycle, because until the 4th year, the price is rising. But during the election year, when the cash is required to fund election campaigns for politicians, a big chunk of the tendu leaves value does not reflect in the auctions. That share of tribals' money basically goes somewhere else, right? Wherever it goes. So there's cartelization that we don't know, but this is exactly the trend of this resource. And I mean, unlike in normal circumstances, you would like to believe that something that goes to people, the money that goes to people, actually the incumbent government would ensure that happens in the election year as well, because that would bring them goodwill, etc. But in this case, because so lucrative, and that's how our political economy works, you see a clear trend that there's cartelization and the money is siphoned off from these auctions. So now I come back to my old question. Who among the 3 actors, the communities, businesses, and the state, play the most critical role in defining environmental conflicts? Ganesh, maybe you can stop sharing the slide. So let me, as I said, there would be different reasoning for everyone. Let me quickly give some more statistics from the Land Conflict Watch data about the actors involved in the conflicts. And we divided these conflicts into, so the definition of for us, for all these natural resources and environmental conflicts is, we're not talking about private resources disputes. We're not talking about private property disputes. One party in these conflicts has to be public or the communities. And then we broke up this data according to who's the second party. So communities or people versus whom in land conflicts. And this is the breakup. So in 95% of the conflicts, state agencies are directly or indirectly involved as parties. While in 27% conflicts, businesses are involved directly as parties. So why is it so? The communities are directly affected in the conflicts. They are the traditional custodians of or users of these resources. They may or may not have legal ownership over these resources, but their relationship with them is often inherent to their survival and identity. The businesses are often the competitors to the communities or the public in claiming rights over these resources, which are not inherent to them. The government agencies are sometimes the direct claimant of rights over natural resources, mostly for the so-called public purpose activities. And most of the other times, they also act as the arbitrator in the transactions between the communities and the businesses. The public trust doctrine of law says that the state holds natural resources such as air, running water, forest, and common land as the trustee on behalf of the public. And so while the natural resources of while it's natural for the communities to fight for livelihood and identity, and it's also natural for businesses to ensure maximum profit, the role of the state as the trustee and the arbitrator is to ensure transactions of natural resources are fair and equitable. Now, how does the state perform this role, right? It performs under a regulatory framework. So there are sets of policies, laws, and rules that govern these transactions. Now, environmental conflicts arise at the time when this regulatory framework itself is inadequate to ensure fair and equitable transactions of resources. At other times, this framework is subverted or bent to favor someone, right? And when this arbitration is not fair, it's usually the less powerful party that loses in these transactions. So maybe I would like to, because there are 10 more minutes, I'd quickly like to spend some more time on what is exactly this regulatory framework in which the transactions of environmental resources take place, and where is the scope of things going wrong from the examples that we have seen, where these transactions are not fair and equitable, which leads to the conflicts or environmental conflicts. Can we go back to the slide, Ganesh? So just click one by one. So say, yeah, business. So there are two kinds of, we place business on top, and then they are seeking, in a hypothetical situation where they are seeking natural resources. There could be two kinds of transactions. One, in the process where they're seeking land use change, and second, where they are seeking access to biodiversity and the traditional knowledge. Next. So if they are seeking access to biodiversity and traditional knowledge, basically this has to be done under the Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Next. And this basically, under this, they have to take permission from the National Biodiversity Authority, State Biodiversity Board, local biodiversity management committees, etc. Next. You can keep going on, Ganesh, actually. And the environment, if the projects or the processes, transactions where the land use change is involved, there are basically two kinds of regulations: environment impact related regulations and the land transfer related regulation. Now, if we look at the environment impact regulation, there are one, when the air and water is used, that's regulated under the Air and Water Act. then pollution-related permissions are taken by these businesses from the authorities. And then there is Environment Protection Act, under which they have to take environment clearance, which then goes to the public hearing so that all the rights and the voices of people and communities affected by it are also heard. Similarly, there is a coastal regulatory zone clearance for the projects that are coming in the coastal areas. And again, a public hearing happens where the concerns and the rights of the people directly affected, the traditional users of these land and resources, are supposed to be heard. And if these processes are also taking place on the land which involves wildlife areas, then they have to take permission under the Wildlife Protection Act from the National Board of Wildlife. Next. And then comes, if actually there is a transfer of land and the rights to use land, then there are land transfer related regulations in which the government or the state agencies actually act as arbitrators. There are two kind of instances where private property of people is involved, and then there are commons involved. Under the private, when the private property transactions are taking place, there will be Land Acquisition Act of 2013, under which they have to take consent from a good proportion of the affected people. There has to be social impact assessment, and there has to be a rehabilitation and resettlement. Now, before this 2013 law came, also, I mean, the state, the government, but exempts a lot of large-scale projects, which specifically deals with railways, highways, coal, and other infrastructure projects from the application of these consent, SIA, and resettlement and rehabilitation processes. And then there are state amendments acts. A lot of states have actually amended this 2013 law and diluted these provisions of consent, SIA, and RRR. So while there is supposed to be a quite progressive law of 2013, which says that, which ensures that the transfer of land and resources should be equitable and fair, their consent should be taken, there should be social impact assessment, there should be resettlement and rehabilitation should be ensured. It doesn't happen in most cases, as you see in this, the other two options, which is the exemptions for large-scale infrastructure projects, and then the lot of states that have come up with their own laws to sort of bypass these provisions. Now, let's come to the common land. A lot of, the common land in the villages could be of two types. There could be forest land, and there could be non-forest common lands, which are under panchayats, etc. For takeover of forest land, there is, of course, Forest Conservation Act, which says that for any kind of change of use on the forest land from forestry to any other activity, especially when businesses are seeking use of these forest land, they have to take forest clearance from the Environment Ministry under the Forest Conservation Act. And then there is Forest Right Acts, which basically says that the forest land belongs, the first right to use, control, and manage forests belongs to the people, tribals who have been traditionally living on these forests. So it has a process of recognition of their rights, etc. And then there is a process of approval from Gram Sabha if the forest land has to be used by somebody else, businesses, or any other entity. Next. And then even for forest clearance, the compliance of the Forest Right Act is necessary now under the law, which basically means that the Gram Sabha's permission should be taken even for businesses if they are taking any, if the land is being used for any other purpose. And now once the rights are settled, the land acquisition, if a business comes on that land and they are acquiring that land, they have to acquire this land even from the tribals whose rights have been settled under Forest Right Act through the land acquisition process. So they have to assess the value of their rights and then compensate them accordingly under the land acquisition law. Next. And there's the non-forest common land. So under the Schedule 5 areas, there is Panchayat's Extension to Schedule Areas Act, which says again that the permission from Gram Sabha has to be taken. And then there are also other commons in panchayats which do not fall under the Schedule 5 areas. Then there is a Supreme Court order that at Land Conflict Watch now we are closely looking at its implementation, etc., which says that there cannot be any kind of encroachment or usurping of the commons of the panchayat. The panchayats are the owners of these land. So while there is still on the forested commons, there is a very laid down clear procedure of how the rights should be recognized, etc. There is a lot of ambiguity on how rights over the commons should be recorded in non-forest areas of people and how they should be compensated, because there is no clear sort of procedures for that. These are the lands which are generally usurped. Either usurped or very easily considered as the government land, and government very easily sort of transfer them for businesses, etc. But as you would see in Land Conflict Watch database, and as I in the beginning I said that the largest number of conflicts are actually involving commons. While they may not be legal rights recognized through the legal processes, we have seen that the people are very cognizant about their practices and traditional practices, and then when their livelihood is impacted by these kind of takeovers, they sort of resort to protest either on the ground or in courts, which leads to conflicts. Next. So yeah, my last bit on this discussion would be that while there is this regulatory framework, and then there are instances where these frameworks have been violated or bent to benefit some parties. There are also gaps in the framework itself, as I pointed out in the commons case, where the framework does not sufficiently or adequately recognize the rights, or there is no process of compensation, etc. So this adequacy in the legal framework or the policy framework might be there, but on the ground, it's basically people who feel that they are short-shifted from the process, and that leads to conflict, as I said, sometimes on the ground, sometimes in court, and that doesn't bode well either for people on the ground or for businesses or for states, because these conflicts take several years to even get resolved, or they keep getting worse. This affects both livelihood, human rights, as well as the economic growth of that region. So that's all from me on this, and I would be happy to take questions or any discussion that follows. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kumar, for those. Hello. Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much for the insightful talk, and yeah, for all the points that you've shared with us today. I'm sure our audience enjoyed it. If you have any questions, may I request the audience to please type it in the chat box, and then we can start addressing them. Meanwhile, I think there is one clarification, Kumar. In one of your earlier slides, someone's asked, what is the 15% land use in chart number 2? So maybe, Ganesh, if you could share the screen again.
This is chart number 2, the slide number 2, is it?
I think so. It was one of the first few slides.
The 15%.
15% land.
Was it about conservation and forestry related conflicts or the land use?
The question says land use, but if JL could unmute and clarify, that would also be great right now.
So about the land use, basically, we could clearly define a lot of categories of activities, right? Infrastructure, we are clear that railways, airports, roads, or any other infrastructure activities. Then similarly for power projects, mining, industry, everything was clear. Conservation and forestry activities, also pretty clear that when there are conservation and forestry activities conflict with the existing use or traditional use of people, then again a lot of conflicts arise. Apart from that, there have been several conflicts where communities are involved. which do not fall in any of these categories, which essentially we, as a broad category, we put them into land use. The examples of that could be, say, natural calamities induced land conflicts. So there have been floods and people have been displaced, and then they go and settle into some other land which is used by other communities, and there are inter-community conflicts in those instances. There are other, say, instances where caste-related conflicts are happening. So higher caste people encroaching upon the lower caste land, or Dalits demanding land rights in some instances. So there are those kind of conflicts. Plus, there are other examples of inter-community conflicts of natural resources as well in forested areas, of access to forest produce or access to water bodies. So those conflicts basically fall in the land use category. Hope that answers.
There's another question regarding the Tendu leaf graph. While the 5th year Tendu leaf price, sorry, 1 second. Yeah, while the 5th year Tendu leaf price drops dramatically, the 4th year shows a huge rise over the preceding years. So any idea why?
I mean, we've really not looked minutely into that, but I can sort of, it's just the hunch that one, the rise is also consistent with the market price and the growth of the market, but also it's as I said during my discussion, that it's also a welfare measure. Every time they give money, while it's supposed to be the money of tribals themselves, it's not something that, you know, the state is giving. It's not a dole by the state. It belongs under the law to them. But there have been instances, and it's quite popular. Every year when these profits are distributed, there is huge sort of campaign and propaganda by the states and governments where this PR campaign that look how so much money we have given to tribals during this. So yeah, just before the elections, I think that's also one of the reasons that they would want people to see their welfare measures and state or the government giving them money to buy their favors.
Thank you. Another question. Can you highlight if any business conglomerates who are genuinely working towards conservation and give their good share in the upliftment of locals would like to know their names and what work they do?
I mean, I'm sure there would be a lot of responsible businesses. Not that all businesses are bad. That's not true. So while all work for profit, etc., they do. Some of them do follow responsible business practices, and I think there are much more awareness and conversations around responsible businesses. Also within CSR, there are a lot of work has been done. I personally haven't looked at this aspect particularly. There are a lot of studies, ample studies of efficacy of CSR money, though mostly points out to it not being efficient, and it sort of becomes a sham after a point. But I'm sure there would be some small or big businesses who might be doing this responsibly.
The next question is related to land conflict. With respect to land conflict's overall work, is there any literature recommended for your readers where you folks have taken inspiration from, or rather even any similar group from other countries?
So actually there is a lot of work on this being done in Latin American countries and in other countries in Global South. There is an organization called Rights and Resources Initiative, which has worked on land conflicts with organizations in other countries. And I'm sure their website has a lot of research about other countries. In India, there was again there were some research done on land conflicts. There is this legal scholar, Shankar Gopalakrishnan, who had done a mapping of similar land conflicts in 2013 before actually Land Conflict Watch started work. Some work on environmental conflict has also been done. A lot of work actually on environmental conflict has been done at the TIS, Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai. Their Professor Geetanjay Sahu, he has done a study on the environmental conflicts cases in the Supreme Court, and how generally the judiciary has responded to these conflicts, on which side does the judiciary sit when these conflicts come in the courts, etc. There is great work done by CPR Land Rights Initiative at the Center for Policy Research. Namita Wahi's work and her team's work on, again, cases and the laws that deals with land disputes is also has a lot of legal pioneering work. At Land Conflict Watch also, now for the past couple of years, we have been looking very rigorously at the legal intersections of land conflicts, how the laws, policies and rules and even the judiciary looks at land conflict. And for the past 2 years, we have been collecting data on each of these 800 cases in our database and looking at which law, which section really played a role in these conflicts. And we have also even gone beyond, say, the existing legal framework to see whether there are loopholes within the existing legal framework which actually play in each of these conflicts. And my colleague Mukta Joshi has been leading that work, and we would be soon coming out with that research as well. And I would, sorry, this is a plug, but I thought this is a good opportunity because you asked. A lot of publications of our work also are available on our website at Land Conflict Watch. And soon this even legal research would be available. So we'd be happy if you can, if it's useful, we'd be happy to sort of get your feedback and see if it's used in your work anywhere. And generally also, the database of Land Conflict Watch itself, sorry, I'll just take one more minute on that. Our database of land conflict is also available publicly, and it's an open source database. And a lot of researchers, journalists, university students use this data into their research. And while there is a very basic primary analysis can be done on the dashboard itself, we are happy to help for academic projects and non-profit projects. If they need even further data and more granular data from our database, we are always happy to share that as well. So yeah, that's about the resources.
That's great to hear. So the next question, in terms of recent exemptions for some kinds of projects, some are based on office memoranda, such as for roads, for defense purposes in border areas, even when passing through or near protected areas, but they are now being allowed or cleared without any process. Can such exemptions be given just based on office memoranda without any amendments in the relevant acts?
Right. So, this is very interesting questions. And then that exactly tells how the role of, say, an executive actually comes into play when these conflicts take place. So you have a broad policy of the government that, this policy will be there for 25 years. And this is how our environmental governance will move. And then you have a law, then you have rules under it. And then they also have office memorandums, like it was pointed out. A lot of times, see, there is the laws and the rules require a lot of deliberations, and there would be public consultation, etc. And that becomes problematic and delays if the motivations of the government is in a certain direction. And that there would be protests, etc. There would be delays. When they find it difficult, it's often in the past few years, the route of office memorandum has been taken, that instead of doing it through the amendment or a policy being debated in public, it's just easy to get done through the office memorandums. The government does have power to do a lot of things through office memorandums, as long as it doesn't violate the policy, the law and the rules. Now, a lot of times, as we say in the government documents, as my senior Nitin Sethi, who's a journalist who's looked at political economy a lot, keeps saying that it's never that the government or the officials write in the documents that there's something is in there's no document which is in violation of something. There is always a word play which finds a way into the existing legal framework to get done what has to be gotten done. So yeah, a lot of times these office memorandums are about that, to get things done in the way that the government wants to get done. Sometimes they are challenged in the court. Sometimes those challenges are sort of sustained. Sometimes it's not. So yeah, it ultimately depends on what the motivations are.
Okay. Often we receive draft notifications under various acts concerned with the environment for stakeholder comments. We painstakingly go through it and give our comments. However, we don't even receive acknowledgement for these comments. So based on your information, do you think there's any value in doing this, or should we start thinking of other ways to communicate our comments on upcoming regulations? And sort of a follow-up question, if we have to focus on other ways, what might they be?
I think it's, I can totally understand. It would be frustrating that, we keep sending these comments and don't even know where do they go. In an ideally functioning democracy and in government, these things should be very, very serious inputs from public, and that's how the whole process is also defined, that you do seek consultation from people, their comments, etc., to sort of modify. In practice, yes, a lot of times this does not change much, but I think it still has value in saying that this, at least there were on record these kind of recommendation and protest, or voices of people were put on record. I think for that much, it's always valuable that these concerns are put on record. And then there could be further processes that could be built on it. I think it's the job of journalists, other public people who have public facing work, to do report on these concerns when they are voiced, and actually also go further and say what really happens to them. We have this wonderful law of RTIs. I think it would be really useful to also file RTIs and see what kind of overall comments were received on a particular draft, a particular sort of proposal, and then see how these changes do reflect or not. I'm not sure what you can do if it doesn't reflect. I think then it's just voicing more and more in public. I think that's something, as a journalist, I could see that that's one thing that does make impact, that, it's talked about in public. A lot of more and more people talk about it, more and more people voice their concerns. And then, of course, there are the legal recourse of if something is, people are really affected, the directly affected people can always go to the courts and voice their concerns there.
What regulations apply in special situations like border areas or a coastal area that have adjoining forest areas? Do you have any examples?
There is for coastal areas, of course, there is a specific set of rules. For forest areas, there would be a specific set of rules. Border areas do have exemptions in the name of, and valid so for the name of security and security developments, etc. Like somebody pointed out that in the border areas, there are exemptions given from more restrictive provisions of the law in terms of developments, etc. So there is, I think, always a fine balance which is needed in such situations. And so in border areas, yes, but in coastal areas, yeah, there are clear provisions for that. And forest areas, there are clear provisions for that as well. Under the under the Forest Conservation Act and Forest Right Act, the regulations of forest areas happen. And for coastal areas, there is CRZ under the Environment Protection Act.
Would giving property rights to the local inhabitants help solve the problem of land conflict? If yes, any ideas how it can be initiated?
I do believe that the right way to address conflicts and environment conflicts is to sort of recognize the land rights of people, this is, morally, ethically, that's the most right thing to do. That all citizens are equal in the country. The few citizens are not lesser than others. So if they have their traditional rights, there should be provisions and processes which recognize those rights. In a lot of cases, earlier there was no, for example, in a lot of areas, even if they don't have the property rights, as you say, a lot of times it's called patta or titles. Even if they don't have, they do consider those rights to be inherited in them, right? People, and then that's why they protest if those are short shifted. So it makes sense to actually formally recognize them and then conduct a process of transaction as equal stakeholders, right? I mean, they have something and you want it, you offer them something that they find more value in to give away what they have. So once you recognize their rights, then there should be a fair process of consultation, discussion, and negotiations where they can negotiate for their land and rights and have a equitable process of compensation, not just for the land, but also the other livelihood and traditional rights associated with land. This is what exactly happens in a lot of cases where the formally rights are not recognized, that the land is considered belonging to government, it's transferred to someone else. Their loss of livelihood and loss of resources of people is never compensated because it's never sort of recorded or recognized. So I do think that it's an easier and more logical thing to do, even for growth and development of the economy and projects, that you do recognize the rights and negotiate with them as equal stakeholders, and then take on from there.
I think the next question is sort of a response to one of your first questions. If we represent tampering of land clearances across state, business, and community with the help of a Venn diagram, don't you think business-induced state tampering has the most share?
All right. So, business-induced state tampering, I would not say. I think there is a, what do we call, in the political economy, a lot of times crony capitalism, right? So there is to and fro and quid pro quo from both sides. There something comes on force, something happens behind the scenes. So what you see is the implications of, say, somebody favoring something, and then you know that, okay, this has happened. Why that favor has been given, we don't know. So there could be transactions of and quid pro quo behind the scenes which we don't know, and we could never know. I mean, there is only to an extent as journalists or people who are watching situations there's only to an extent that they can know. But I think what's important to highlight and show is the state's role, as I said, because state is more responsible. It's the responsibility of the state and the government agencies towards people as trustees of these resources to conduct the fair transactions and do fair arbitration in that. And that's something that we all ask the accountability at from where. And that's why I think it's important to highlight the role of the state and the government agencies.
I think there are a couple of more questions. Can there be a single large public lawsuit that leverages historic satellite data to prove that bureaucracy has been selling itself out over the years, given that it's very hard to tamper with such data that's available globally?
So I would assume that maybe you're talking about resources, say forest resources, etc., satellite mapping of forest resources. And yeah, there have been, I think, ample evidence, scientific evidence a lot of times, which show that there has been fudging in the data of forest, etc., forest growth. I am not the expert on the satellite mapping and technology, but yeah, I think if we can have the evidence at that scale, maybe a people's atlas of, say, forest and land, which could be which can collect evidence, scientific evidence of land resources, etc., and the changes over the years. I think it would be, there would be a lot of irregularities that would come out from that I'm pretty sure. I mean, we find these irregularities in bits and pieces from the scientific evidence created by very committed scientists in one corner or the other. And also within the government data itself, like forestry data, every 2 years you find this Forest Survey of India report, which says that the forest cover of the country has been increasing. But if you look at their 20 years of data, you'll find the methodology has been changed every 2 years or every 3 years, which rather contributes to this just the trick of changing the numbers through the methodology rather contributes more to the growth of forest than actually the trees growing on the ground. So those things are already there, and I think it would be very valuable if there is satellite data, nationwide satellite data, which is credible and available for people to see.
I think we'll take 2 more questions. Okay, wondering if the land conflict watch data indicates whether laws or regulation work counter to the stated intent of such laws itself. For example, would the Forest Rights Act, ostensibly meant to safeguard the rights of forest-dwelling people, actually work against them?
I wouldn't say in this case. Yeah, I mean, it's also a lot of times it does get counterproductive how a law is implemented. For instance, yeah, in this case, I can clearly see one example, and there have been reports from the ground where, there have been instances of people who have traditionally, say, accessed a much larger area of forest. But when they file claims, the control and the authority to actually decide how much land they were using or not comes to the bureaucracy, right? And in a lot of instances, that had been curtailed or those claims have been rejected, which now has been registered in the government documents that, okay, this claim has been rejected, which means this person now does not have the right on it, while traditionally they were using it. So yeah, there is always a risk, I think, with every law, that how it's implemented by the bureaucratic processes, it could have its own drawbacks. Similarly, the example of, say, that Supreme Court order about the commons, Jagpal Singh versus the state of Punjab, where it said that all the encroachments from the village commons needs to be removed, and the common lands needs to be restored to the panchayats. Now that actually the judgment was about say builders or these vested interest encroaching on the common land. Now in a lot of states that judgment is actually implemented to say that no encroachment should be allowed. So then the landless people, Dalits, or a lot of, say, just slum dwellers, etc., they are staying, they are landless, so where will they go? They obviously can't go and live in a private property or someone's land. They often do stay in commons. And in fact, traditionally, a lot of state did have provisions for allotting the commons to landless, Dalits, etc. But after this order, the bureaucracy in a lot of state secretaries gave blanket orders that all encroachment needs to be removed from the commons, and that in many states affected the landless and vulnerable people a lot as well.
So in the interest of time, I'll just take one last question. Is the community aware about the link you highlighted between the election year and the Tendu price differences, since you have data over so many years? And does your organization do any on-ground awareness with these communities as well?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I just lost it.
Sorry. Is the community aware about the link that you highlighted between the election year and the Tendu leaf price differences? And does your organization do any on-ground awareness with these communities?
I mean, we would have loved to. I mean, as the Land Conflict Watch is a research agency, and with its limited resources, what we do is we do conduct research and put it in public domain, and we rely and depend a lot on other organizations to collaborate and use this work to disseminate further. especially to the people affected. So I think none of us or any other organizations independently do a lot what is actually required on the ground. But something, this story we reported, I reported as a journalist in Business Standard, and I think attempt is always to reach out to more and more people through media, through public, by putting our work in public domain. Land Conflict Watch, say our data and our publications are all put in public domain, open for everyone. And I think it would be really valuable and useful for others to also join hands and then reach out to people directly. In this particular case, to answer your first part of your question, I'm not sure if communities actually on the ground are aware. I think a lot of times, while there is this law that they own these resources, right? The way, again, as I said, bureaucratically, how these laws are implemented and these processes are given, it's always shown on the ground by the governments that these are the doles that they're giving, the money being given to people. So they always like apply, they wait for their profit to come back, and they're very grateful a lot of times that, okay, this much profit has come, etc. Yeah, I don't think really the people on the ground are aware. I think that's where the work of awareness creators, so to say, becomes really more important. Media, people, activists, movements, etc.
Thank you. I think we'll end the questions here. The chat box does have some links and comments by the audience. So yeah, please go through that at some point. Sure. Thank you so much, Kumar, for such a lovely talk. And yeah, for it seems like a very interesting data set that you've been able to compile. And thanks for sharing your insights with us. And finally, thank you all for attending today's talk. We'll be closing this session today. We'll be meeting again on 19th November, next Friday at 4:30 p.m. for a talk by Dr. Nitin Rai. He will be talking about the perils of conservation acquiescence. So we hope to see you all there next. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Apita, would you be sharing the comments, etc., from the chat box with me?
Sure, we can do that. Yeah.
We'll share that with you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, NCF. Thank you, Aparajita, and thank you, everyone, for coming in.
Thanks, Kumar. This was a
Bye.
really
Bye.
insightful talk. Thank you.
Lovely to have you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.